Welcome to On the Brink with Andi Simon. I'm Andi Simon, and as I say for each of our podcasts, I'm here to be your host and your guide. Our job is to get you off the brink. What we want to do with these podcasts is bring you people who are going to help you see, feel, and think about yourself through a fresh lens in new ways. As an anthropologist, I want to teach you to be a little bit of an anthropologist about your own life, your career, your personal, whatever it is that matters to you, and why you come to On the Brink to learn more, to find out great stories that could help you do better and change. And these are very fast changing times. So today I have a woman who was on one of our podcasts in 2023, Nori Jabba, who did a great job then talking about her book, which was called Keeping Your Seat at the Table. And we'll talk very briefly about that today, but she has a chapter coming out in a book with 35 women who have written stories about their stories. And you know, and I say this often to my clients, to my consulting clients, that the story in your mind is what you live. You believe that story to be true. I'm sorry to say the only truth is there's no truth. However, once you've got that story in there, it guides your perception of reality, and there's no reality. So once you have this illusion, you become wedded to it, and change is very difficult because you need to change the story. So we're going to listen today about voice, storytelling, and for women, how do you master that story in a way that can really elevate you and take you where you'd like to go? Because only you can control the story. Others can help influence it, but no, only you can control the story in your mind. Nori, thanks for being here today.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, Andi.
Now, Nori's bio is a wonderful one. She grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. Her 30-year career includes experience in corporate real estate, community development, and affordable housing. A few years ago, she decided to look for employed work again after years of consulting and realized that she had lost her seat at the table. So no one would hire her despite relevant experience, qualifications, and several awards. After multiple disappointments, she abandoned her job search and opted for research and perspective to better understand why job hunting is so challenging for middle-aged women who should have reached their prime. So what you learned was too valuable not to share. So the first book, Keeping Your Seat at the Table, is a memoir and a guide on combating ageism in the workplace. Now, Nori lives in San Francisco Bay, is the mother of 3 adult daughters and a rescued Doberman. She's got great stories to share at norijabba.com, and we'll put that in our podcast blog as well. But Nori's got more to share with you about who is Nori, what's her journey, and why is this chapter so important to her as a way of understanding how women not only have to find their voice, I don't know why we have one, but master it in a way that others can hear us. And my last little remember what you say isn't necessarily what people hear. And what you meant isn't necessarily what they capture in what you say. It's not so easy to communicate. Nori, thank you. And tell us about your own journey.
Thank you, Andi. So I wrote this chapter in this book. It's called The Road to Mastering My Voice. And my voice is unique. Everybody's is, but yet it's not, because I have an identical twin sister. So I get to hear my voice because our voices are also identical. So it's been a really interesting journey through my life of trying to be comfortable with my own voice, learning how to use it, but also hearing it from my twin. And the sad part is that both of us have never really liked our voices. So my journey is not just about mastering my voice, but learning to love my voice and learning how to embrace it with all of its flaws. And so the journey on mastering my voice, I looked back in my childhood, and I've always been somebody who is not afraid to speak up. And I realized looking back that so many times in my life, I had used my voice too much, to my detriment, and had to learn and grow from it, as we all do. We do this dance, right? So my journey in mastering my voice is really, really learning to love my voice and therefore love myself more.
Well, tell us a little bit about this book. This is a chapter in a book with 35 other women Who was it compiled by? What is the purpose of the book? Because their stories are very powerful and very interesting.
Yes, so it's a book about, well, it's from 35 different authors, and it was compiled by Susan Freeman, who runs an organization called Empowered Women. And she puts on events, she puts on a conference every year, and it's a one-day conference in a different city and pulls in women professionals from all over. And we get together one day a year and share our stories. And there are speakers, maybe 8 speakers, that go through the day and share their stories. And then we get to know each other. And she has retreats. And then she decided last year, let's put our stories together in a book and share them with others. So it is called Own Your Story. And it is 35 stories of professional women sharing their own journey. So they each have their own personal journey. No, there's no theme to the book other than telling your story. And it's really a hero story for women, sheroes, as Susan likes to call them.
Well, you have the book there, right? So for our audio folks, you won't be able to see it, but for the video folks, you certainly can. But no, put it up again just for another moment. It's a really great cover. I love the faces of the women on there. Empower, connect, and create change. Own your story. How interesting. Now, in writing your story on mastering your voice, you had an agenda, a purpose. And while you're learning to like your voice and hear it out of your twin, it's a very interesting setup for this whole question about how do I tell my story? What ways does it come across? Did you had a whole discovery going on? Share it with us.
Yes, so my discovery as I was writing this chapter and really thinking about how we master our voices as women, I thought about the phrase, find your voice, right? Have I found my voice? And I realized that that phrase is really reserved for women. You don't hear too many men talking about finding their voice or telling other men to find your voice. But women, we tend to talk about finding our voice as if it's been lost somehow. And so I really wanted to change the narrative away from finding your voice to mastering your voice. It's much more empowering. And so I really thought about, what does that mean? And how have I used my voice to help me in my life or to hurt me? And so it was a reflective journey of, I have used my voice to my detriment many, many times, but out of each of those times comes tremendous growth. One of the first things that I remember as a child was in 2nd grade, where my teacher snapped at me. She wasn't a very nice lady. I tried to connect with her throughout the year, but it didn't work. But I was sitting in my chair at school on my legs, kind of the sitting just on having them up on the chair. And she yelled at me, stop sitting like that, put your legs down. If God wanted you to have legs, God wanted you to sit like that, he wouldn't have given you legs. And I snapped back, well, I don't believe in God, which was, here's this little 7 or 8-year-old girl and so quiet, right? And the whole class was just utterly shocked and burst out laughing. And the teacher yelled at me and, snapped, don't you ever do that again. And I was in trouble for the whole rest of the year. But, and out of that journey, the kids would connect with me and say, gosh, I'm so jealous you don't have to go to catechism. And I started talking to my parents, well, why don't we believe in God in my family? And what's the story behind that? So it prompted this learning and exploration and questioning that I have done my whole life. And I later did become Catholic of all things and am still Catholic today. And my kids went to Catholic school and my parents have embraced that. But it was really that beginning where I started using my voice to question and to call somebody out on something and a very incorrect assumption. So that was a little scary and a milestone in my life that set the course for times to come.
Though, I would have done what you did. I mean, I'm too brazen, bold, courageous, and I know It doesn't matter to me. It's sort of like my mother raised me to be my own person. And she would say, I don't really care what all the other kids are doing. I care what you're doing. For a child growing up, though, that means you have to know what you are doing. And in that moment, you knew who you were, you knew what you believed, and you knew what you wanted to tell in your voice. But it is, I find that bold, brave, courageous, but out of the quote unquote mistake. Was it a mistake or was it not? You learned
It,
a lot.
it was not a mistake, but it definitely made me very aware of how my voice can be used as a weapon, as a tool, and not just as a way to communicate. It really can be a tool and a weapon. And we have that power. You have power over your own voice. And I think that's something that women don't acknowledge enough. We don't give ourselves that power enough. And it goes back to find your voice, right? I'm finding my voice. No, let's master our voices. Let's empower ourselves. So that story of second grade repeated itself many times in my life. I share another story when I jumped in the car and got in the front seat, and my older sister literally like picked me up and threw me out and said, babies, go in the back, right? And so I yelled at her terribly. I was so taken aback by her aggression. And I yelled really loudly, and we were going to ride go-karts, and I was so excited about going to ride the go-karts. And my dad didn't hear my sister be mean to me, but he heard me be mean to her. And he said, that's it, you're not going. I'm like, wait, no, what? Wait, you don't understand. He said, no, you're not going. And I missed out on those go-karts. And to this day, if I get to ride in Malibu Grand Prix or go faster, I still enjoy it so much because I missed out on that go-kart. But it was another episode of your voice is your power, and it can also be a weapon, and it could be misinterpreted. So, learning to master it is really key. And later on in my career, I was a younger looking woman, and I was the boss, and I had all these men reporting to me who were much older than I was. And, learning to master my voice with that group was a huge challenge, huge.
Well, I remember being in a similar situation. I want to know how you mastered it because I didn't know I had to master it. I just was moving up in my career. And when you're an SVP of a bank, you don't really know that you need to do anything with your voice except be who they think they hired, who they don't really know, and speak truth, which you think is truth. But it's really their perception of it, only to realize that their heads are in different places. Tell me about that. From your perspective, what did you learn?
So I learned about recognizing how to master my voice in that corporate situation,
Mhm.
not from the men who reported to me, but from another woman who called me out one day and said, you're too folksy, Folksy. And I thought, what does that mean? What do you mean? And I was really kind of taken aback. She was a contractor who reported to me, I managed her contract. She was about my age, maybe a couple of years older, and not in a position of authority, but, and I truly do appreciate that she did share this with me, but it was really kind of insulting the way that she said it, and I didn't take it well at all. But I still think about it because it really struck me and made me think about, wow, am I too casual? And so I realized that I like to be conversational. That's how I connect to people. I can be authoritative, and she felt that I wasn't being authoritative enough. And that's really all she meant, that I was trying a little too hard to connect with the guys on my team. And, I was trying to be a little too casual with them. So I did take that to heart and stepped back and tried to be more authoritative and less casual, less folksy, as she called it. But it never felt right. It just never, and my team didn't really like this new me. And when the contractor was gone and the contract was over, there was sort of a sigh of relief. Okay, now we can just go back to how we were, which worked really well for our team. So it was a good lesson for me of taking that feedback, but also understanding, being authentic to myself, because I stopped being authentic and it just wasn't who I was. But I did adapt a few changes and became, learned how to be a little bit more authoritative. So then I had 3 kids, and that certainly helped. I could be both folksy with them and authoritative. And as a mom, you have to be many different voices all at the same time, right? You have to be nurturing and loving and strict and authoritative, and it's a dance all the time. So that comment, I'm grateful for it because it has helped me learn how to be authentic.
You're reminding me of a woman I'm coaching who has been moved up into a senior position in an organization. And her boss asked me if I could help her develop executive presence. Now, she's very smart, and she gets lost sometimes in the weeds or the detail. And I remember that feeling of knowing so much that you want to share it, but you don't realize that the people who you're telling a story about this detail don't really care about the detail. They care about what does it mean and what is it you want them to think about and what's the story there. And it doesn't matter whether it's healthcare or banking or accounting or whatever. What does an executive sound like? What's that voice? And how is it different from a middle manager who's down in the field helping people change so they can do better? And it's very, very timely, but it's also very difficult to know because you don't hear yourself. And so as we're coaching and she says things, that I have to pause and say, well, that's not something you want to say too often here. And we've got to move it from an I to a we conversation. You have to have conversational intelligence, like Judith Glaser tells us. You want to co-create the solution with their minds, as opposed to preach to them on your wisdom. And those she gets, but now we have to rehearse and practice as if she's going on stage, because it's not that different than a role on a stage where you need to manage the position and the presence so people know that it may not be you, but it is you on stage. So I have a hunch that you've watched the mastering of the voice in professional ways, really materialize and help you grow in your own personal development. What do you think?
Absolutely. And I developed an acronym to master your voice that I think really sums it all up. And it's called VOICE, of course. And I can share that with you if you'd like.
Why not? I mean, I think this is interesting because help me help my clients at the same time, or the listeners, because the VOICE acronym is very clear about what you're trying to achieve. Please share it.
Yeah. So I see your voice as a filter, right? It's a conduit. And that's how we need to think of it. And so VOICE, the acronym, the first one is letter V for volume. And I have a very soft voice. I used to teach in a classroom when I lived in Austria, 50 boys in a classroom with ceilings that were maybe 30 feet tall. And I have a voice that doesn't carry, and I would lose my voice after every Monday. It was just exhausting. But learning how to adjust that volume is really key. Speaking, a lot of women speak from the front of their mouth rather than the back. And there are books on this that you can, and actually one story I have to share on this is from a council member of my city, and I worked in politics. So we had gotten to be friends, and yet we had a professional relationship. He wanted to invite me to dinner to meet some, quote, friends of his. Well, they were his voice coaches, and they provided coaching just on your voice for him and his team because he had trouble mastering his own voice. And, he was a really shy man. And so he had to learn how to use his voice. So he introduced me to these people, but why? Because he thought I needed help, which I did. again, he recognized in me what he saw in himself, a little bit of hesitation, a little bit of not knowing how to master that volume. So I learned a lot from these people. And as disheartening as it was, like, oh, I need help with my voice, it was also a wonderful gift that he gave me. So volume, and they taught me, how to speak from back rather than the front, where the pitch is really important, and volume. Second one is opportunity. So using your voice, thinking of it as an opportunity to share who you are, your authentic self, your message. How you do that is key. The next one is I for intelligence, and always recognizing that you can come across as intelligent or not, all in how you use your voice. And so what is it that you are trying to share? And using intelligence and just thinking about how you are coming across is key. And the next one is content. So keeping aware of what the content is and how you're going to share it. And then finally, emotion, sharing how much emotion are you going to use in your voice. So it's a filter with all of these things, and it's not complete. There are other elements, but I really liked those 5 and trying to capture that when you use your voice and really just thinking about it. So in a professional context, if you're going on stage, if you have to make a presentation, think about VOICE and those 5 things and how you're going to use your voice with that in mind.
When you were talking about mastering this, do people need coaches or mentors, and can they hear themselves, or should they record themselves and watch themselves? What kind of how-tos?
Absolutely. Recording yourself and watching yourself is so important. The most important thing I think you can do, though, is speak aloud and record your voice. So when I wrote my book, I am an audiobook lover. And so I knew that I had to have an audio version of my book. And I also know that when it comes to memoir, I want to hear from the author. I don't want to hear anybody else's voice. It just doesn't resonate with me as much. So I knew I had to record my book. So I found a producer. I used Squeaky Cheese in Petaluma, California, and small operation and fantastic presence in the audiobook world. And they basically taught me how to master my voice in an audio setting. And we all speak, we've all given presentations if we're professionals, so you think you've got it. No, it was the hardest thing I ever had to do. And it took hours and hours and hours, as you can imagine, to record a book. But I learned so much about my voice. And through that process, I learned how to treat my voice better. My voice is almost like a separate part of me. It's almost like a separate being that needs nurturing and care. And it's an entire body experience. You don't realize that until you are in a booth recording a book and you have to sit up straight and hold your head a certain way and engage your core. It's exercise, right? Use your hands. It's full body experience. But through that process, I really learned a lot about my voice. So you hear it back, you hear when it starts breaking, you understand when it gets tired, you learn how to care for it, to take a break, to use the spray, to make certain sounds, to exercise. But listening to your voice is the most important thing you can do.
Now, what are you doing? Are you mentoring others? Do you now offer yourself as a coach in this mastering your voice, or is this something nice to have and not necessarily a part of your business?
So I do coaching and public speaking. I speak on ageism in the workplace, and I would love to speak on mastering your voice. I haven't done any professional speaking on it yet, but I bring it up a lot because I wrote this chapter. And so, as I head towards retirement, and I am 60 years old now, and I work in affordable housing for a city, and I love my job. But when I retire, my retirement career is going to be on speaking. So I'm going to continue speaking on all of these topics, including mastering your voice. I think it's so important for women, for men too, but for women in particular. because our voices tend to be criticized a lot more than men. You know, we use a harsher lens if we have a high pitch, or we become more aggressive through our voice. There are terms that people use for women that we wouldn't use for men at all. And you can see it in the debates, you can see it with politics. It's just a different lens that we use to evaluate women's voices. So I hope to share that with women through coaching and public speaking.
This has been absolutely wonderful interview. I'm delighted that you came on because the timing is right, and particularly in the middle of this particular election, and the way in which people, guys in particular, judging others based upon their voice. And it is less about what they've done or said than what they feel. And remember, we decide with the eyes and the heart, not with the head. And the head follows and justifies it, but what you hear and see is how you begin to form decisions about how you want to follow them. You know, your contractors who were happier when you were folksy were telling you something about how they heard you. And it wasn't the word you said, but it was the tonality in the way you said it. This is when I ask, we're about ready to wrap up, but you know, one or two things you want the listeners to remember and walk away with, anything in particular?
So don't find your voice. Don't worry about finding your voice. Master your voice. Your voice is your superpower.
Good. And that requires us to remember the VOICE, the volume, the opportunity, the intelligence, the content, and the emotion, particularly the emotion. Remember how it feels matters probably as much as what you're saying, and how they hear you depends as much on their story in their mind and how they see you. And I often say that life is like a stage. Everybody is a performer. And now for women, as we're growing in this society into corporations and our own business, we need to be able to be very plastic and be able to see how our voice is impacting people in different settings and in different ways. And so Nori has brought us a great approach. For herself, it's been a life's journey of discovery. And for you, our listener or our viewer, you know, go apply it. Begin to see what's happening. Record your voice. Zoom makes it pretty easy. And as you do it, then have somebody else say, what do I sound like? Am I authoritative or am I collaborative? You know, am I looking to create together or am I looking to control? You know, what do the words, same words you can say in different ways that make it work or not work? And so on that note, I'm going to wish everybody a wonderful day, however you may be listening or viewing us. Remember my books, On the Brink, Fresh Lens to Take Your Business to New Heights, which was the catalyst for this podcast. Rethink, Smashing the Myths of Women with Business, and Women Mean Business are all available on Amazon. My job is to help you see, feel, and think in new ways, and take the anthropologist in me and spread it out there so that you can all step back for a moment, a little like today, and hear yourself, see what happens when you speak, and understand what's working and what needs to be mastered better. And I love to tell you to take your observations and turn them into innovations, because that's what we do. People say, what does an anthropologist do? I said, we hang out. But what we're observing can help others begin to see themselves through a fresh lens. And on that note, I will say, have a wonderful day. Stay well. Send me your ideas at info@andisimon.com and come visit and send me great people. I mean, we're done a 405th podcast and we have a dozen more coming through. And listen carefully, share them around. We're in the top 5% of podcasts thanks to you. And we want to keep growing. It's a wonderful thing to share. Goodbye now. Nori, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Hope you've had fun. Bye-bye now.
Yeah.